Hello and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to today's webinar called Navigating Turbulent Times in Philanthropy, Prepare to Align Strategy and Impact Management. So my name is Lisa Hemberger. I'm a professor at Esade Business School and director of the Esade Center for Social Impact. And I will be joined today by Leonora Buckland, who is a senior research scholar here at Esade Center for Social Impact, as well as Jim McCormick, who's the CEO of the Robertson Trust, and Rose Thompson-Kuhn, who's Chief of Strategy at Sitra, as well as Harry Devonshire, who's Head of Advocacy and Research at Argidius Foundation. Very happy to have all of you with us today, and you will have a chance to introduce yourselves quite soon. Just something about the webinar. We're launching a new series of publications that are showing how leading European philanthropies are working to strengthen impact by aligning impact measurement and management with strategic decision-making. And the publication has four different parts. So an insights paper that is introducing this framework that we are launching. It's a diagnostic tool to help your organization align strategy, learning, and decision-making. And we also have three practical in-depth case studies of the three organizations that I just mentioned before. In terms of agenda, we're now starting with the introduction to the research, and I'll soon hand over to Leonora to talk about the research. And then we'll also have contributions by our panelists, followed by a Q&A. And if you do have questions, and we hope that you have many questions for us, you can post those questions in the Q&A box in the webinar. You can also use the chat to introduce yourselves and have conversations through the chat. But if you have specific questions to us and the panelists, please post those in the Q&A. And I just wanted to say a few things about us as a center. We are a center hosted by a business school, Esade Business School, and we work on social impact. So we want to make sure that everything that we do is related to impact in terms of the teaching and the research and the social debate, so that all of these different elements lead to impact, but we're also researching about impact. And most of the topics that we work on are either around the funding of impact, so on philanthropy and impact investing, but also generation of impact, so impact entrepreneurship, and then the topic of the day, which is impact measurement and management. We also work on gender lens investing. And what do we mean by impact? Well, an impact measurement and management. So starting with impact, it's really about the effects that are experienced by people or the planet as a consequence of our activities. And when we then move to measurement, it's really about measuring these effects. And as you probably know, there are lots of different tools, methods, frameworks, and approaches to doing that, which is part of what we do in our research center as well, to study these different methods. But we want to move beyond just the measurement and also think about management. So how do we integrate impact data in our decision-making, in the way we work as organizations? And here it's really about how to use our resources in the best way, how to plan and develop strategy, which is the topic of the webinar today, but really how do we generate and optimize impact in the best way? And we have developed and we've worked through a community of practice over these past 5 years, and this has been in collaboration with BBK, which is a foundation based in Bilbao, and then in this past year as well, supported by Porticus and King Baudouin Foundation, where these foundations that are mentioned here on the slide have participated in regular meetings where we have come together to discuss some of the challenges that foundations are facing when it comes to impact measurement, but also more importantly, like how to manage that and how to optimize resources to generate more impact. And that's really the starting point of this research. And now I'm going to hand over to Leonora, who will explain the project itself.
Thank you, Lisa. So welcome everyone. And yeah, the reason we're here really is to share the launch of this new report, which really treats this issue of how can we make impact measurement and management, which some of you may know as monitoring, evaluation and learning, as meaningful, relevant and useful as possible. And one of the issues that we found, and we heard a lot from our community of practice that Lisa mentioned, was that often there isn't enough alignment between all of the information, impact data, learning, insights being developed within the philanthropy and the actual decisions. And I've put here those kind of critical questions, strategic questions are we doing the right things? And are we doing the right things right? So sometimes all of that information that's being collected isn't properly used to answer those big sort of strategic questions. And I think there's a little bit of in a way, a crisis or a question mark as to what strategic philanthropy, which is sort of a trend over the last decades in making philanthropy kind of more strategic, what that actually looks like and means in today's world. And I think our panelists will have some insights about that. And so this report really was trying to kind of delve into that topic, faced as we all are by these kind of very dynamic, shifting external situations. And what we're really trying to do in this research is to provide these very practical case studies, these stories that helps the field really understand not just high-level frameworks, but really the nitty-gritty of what it actually means to work to be trying to develop the strategy and impact alignment. So next slide, Laura. And this is something that is of deep concern to our members, and I'm sure you're probably here for the same reason, that you actually think it's really important that monitoring, evaluation and learning, IMM, is actually strategic, and that therefore it's going to be utilised to the best way. Next slide. And just to say that we do have other publications and research reports. So this is kind of cumulatively building on some of the work that we've done before, and for those, and really have worked with the community of practice that we mentioned with. So for those who are slightly newer to us, to the centre, to the community of practice, you might want to kind of delve into these other topics, and in particular, the governance of impact research, which we launched most recently, is very touches very much on this topic of strategy and impact alignment, because good governance will really be, governance of impact will really be about creating this better alignment. Next slide. So as Lisa was saying, we have one main report. I'm going to very briefly talk about a few of the key insights from that main report. And then we have 3 separate case studies. And each of our panelists comes from one of the organizations where there's a case study, and they'll give you sort of 5 minutes each, as it were, on their case study before we move into the panel. But in terms of the sort of main report, which tries to bring together everything we discussed as a community, our own research, as well as the case studies, we heard the kind of frustration from the philanthropies who were part of our community, that there wasn't this strong alignment, although some were working towards it. And so we were really trying to understand, what's getting in the way. what are the key challenges? And actually, surprisingly, the first and most important challenge that was mentioned was actually just that the strategic processes within the philanthropy were not very kind of clear or ordered. And we heard quite often that it could be that program teams have their own rhythm, and it's quite hard for an impact team, if it's not part of the program, to feed into those. That maybe a foundation is having quite a lot of new strategies depending on new leaders coming in. So it feels as if there's not like a clear strategic process. And this is actually very common. It's also common in businesses, which I'm sure everyone knows, and that there's a lot of focus on the operational, the urgent, and maybe not so much necessarily on the strategic. So that was actually the kind of biggest challenge that was mentioned. And then, of course, the resources was the second challenge. And this comes down to basically to make good evidence that counts, evidence that matters for these high-level decisions can be quite expensive. And many people don't have, dedicated resources don't have an impact function. And maybe they feel like they can't invest or leverage the information properly. So I think that there's different lessons and insights to be drawn from the case studies and from the research report for foundations who have different sort of budgets available, as it were. But it's obviously a common issue that's mentioned. And then just the culture, and this kind of comes back to something we've been banging our drum about, which is creating an impact culture at all levels of the organization does take time. And developing this alignment can sometimes shake up sort of existing ways of working, particularly, for example, if program teams are quite kind of siloed and do their own thing. And that comes to the fourth challenge, which is around the fact that sometimes impact and strategy don't sit in the same place. They're not at the same level. And so one of the things about all of our case studies is that they do have like very senior impact functions who are part of the senior management team, and they do have a strategic role. So I think that's really important. And then the stakeholders was the last. So there's a lot of kind of cultural, maybe softer elements, which are kind of impeding this strong strategy IMM alignment. Next slide, Laura. And in terms of the tools, as Lisa mentioned, we do think about culture and operations, but also about different kind of IMM tools. And I would like to nod very much to one of our friends and collaborators, Julia Kaufman, whose slide this actually comes from. And Julia was at the Center for Evaluation Innovation when she developed this, but basically it's talking about how IMM tools vary depending on the type of strategy you might have. So that's something we also explore a little bit in the research, and of course in the case studies that's very much the case. So on the left-hand side, if your strategy is more of a plan, maybe it's scaling up an existing service or program that works. You might be thinking about sort of a clearer log frame or logic chain, which we're all quite used to in evaluation with KPIs and things. But as you move to the right of strategy becoming a set of hypotheses, or even really working within that sort of systems space, which many foundations now are, then the type of tools you're using start to shift. You've got theories of change and all the assumptions behind that, but on the systems front, you start to think about foresight, about developmental evaluation, and these are all things that are explored in the case studies and in the research. Next slide. So our kind of key overarching framework that we have come up with in the research is something called the PREPARE framework, which is sort of preparing for this quite turbulent time, I think, in terms of philanthropy and philanthropic strategy. And so we sort of built some different dimensions. So the first one is obviously the prioritization around both strategy and IMM work and their link. And this is kind of the starting point and the platform for everything that follows. the R for the respect for the whole field. And one of the things that we see happening is that philanthropies and many organizations come to these kind of issues and slightly reinvent the wheel, and actually a more collaborative approach, working with the existing evidence base, not necessarily having to do all the data collection, everything yourself, can work really well. And the key kind of words like curiosity and trust are really important there. And then engaged governors and engaged governance, that makes a massive difference, as I think the case studies will show, but it's not an easy thing. And we know that many people come to us and have a lot of difficulties with the sort of translation of all of this impact work to that sort of board level of their organizations. And then the P, the second P, is more for participation. So that's also bringing in all the external stakeholders, partners, and there are some really nice examples of how foundations are doing that. And then we talk about agile and right size, which is also about understanding that not everyone has a big foundation with a big budget. And also it is important in this time of uncertainty to not get kind of locked into methodologies and ways of doing things. And then finally, we talk about embedded. So whether you have a separate impact team or you don't have an impact team, your program teams are doing the sort of impact related tasks. It's very important that there is this kind of embedded link between strategy and IMM. Next slide. And so in the report, we have a kind of a diagnostic framework, which we recommend that maybe you want to look at and use. And this is just an example of one part of it. It's obviously much longer, but where you can sort of trace where you are on each of these dimensions. And it's just helpful for you to, as a reflection tool, but also potentially as a discussion tool with maybe your team, or broader than that in your organization. Okay, so that is a rather rapid fire overview of some of what's in the report, just to give you a bit of a taster. And now I think we can really kind of get into the meat of this topic by actually hearing from the philanthropies and the case studies themselves. So I'd love to introduce Jim McCormick, who is the CEO of the Robertson Trust, to talk a little bit about them and their strategy and IMM alignment.
Thanks very much, Leonora. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name's Jim. I'm today joining you from Scotland in Glasgow, and I'm going to speak for 5 minutes about our story, our case study story, which is either one of navigating turbulent waters or maybe walking a tightrope, to pick up on one of the covers of one of your previous reports. In brief, our story up to today is one of reaching a good, solid place, but through a pretty tricky pathway, where not everything has gone to plan at all, but we've landed in a good place. If we go to the next slide, I'll really briefly introduce who we are and what we do. So we're in Scotland. We are an independent social change organisation with grant making at our heart. Here's what we're about: preventing and reducing poverty and related trauma. The words in bold are our 3 objectives, and we have 3 values just below, which we're about to turn into 4 by adding the value of equity. And we are 5 years in to a 10-year strategy. And there's a clue to why it's not easy to make this sync or be phased neatly, because our strategy came in 2020. We then have a 3-year delivery plan. Before that ends, we revise our mission statement based upon our learning and our action. And in tandem, we've been trying to build an impact and insights framework through various iterative test and learn loops, while also, within an 18-month period, having half of our board turning over. So there's just some elements of change, not to mention the degree of upheaval and crisis we see in the external environment. So on the next slide, really briefly, here's how we break down the bulk of our grant making into two broad channels: responsive funding on the left, long-term social change funding on the right, where we're trying to get more preventative and move upstream. So we do both these things. We have these four thematic lenses to break down this big challenge of poverty and trauma. You can see these four themes, and then we have cross-cutting objectives around climate and around equity and diversity. And whichever mode we're in, we try and stay true to our mission, our thematic priorities, and a focus on the long term. And because of that breadth, that bandwidth in our work, it creates real challenges for understanding impact. How do we do it in a way that's robust, proportionate, meaningful, and doesn't impose an unreasonable burden upon our grant holders and partners? So next slide, please. Coming on to where we've got to over this period of change, we now have a framework. It's no longer just an internal framework that we've wrapped our arms around until we're confident in it. It's out in the open. And we're really pleased to be at this point. Even 6-9 months ago, I don't think we could have told our story quite in this way. We have an annual cycle which we run through our board meetings. So we have a strategic learning cycle with staff and with trustees, where we take one of our 4 themes each quarter and we do a deep dive and we ask ourselves what's going on. We ask our partners what's going on. And we do that through end-of-year grant reports, evaluations, by working with our lived experience partners, and through, really importantly, a set of sense-making conversations, which is the engagement bit with stakeholders, where we try and bring people into a room for a day. No matter what kind of grant you might have, if you're working on that theme, we want to put our heads together. And then we publish a really accessible thematic learning report. And you can see 2 examples here on financial security and on work pathways, our first 2 themes. And we do that not just to share our learning and to give a platform for our grant holders, but we do it to ask ourselves, how do we plug those insights into our decision-making loops so that we are making improved and more informed decisions in a world that's changing very, very, very fast. And if we're honest, changing faster than our learning frameworks can keep up with. I should say that all this is underpinned by our values. We've been working with IVAR as expert partners in the UK to help us get this right. I should also say I'm presenting this today on behalf of our small but powerful learning communications team, and my colleagues Cassie and Rachel are participating. They're joining today as well. So on the last slide then, it's a very quick run through. What's next? Here are some photos of a couple of the collective learning sessions that we've done, the sense-making sessions. I'll let you read the quote that's there from one of our grant holders. But I wanted to end on what we got to in terms of improving the process here and bringing it all back into alignment with where we've got to with our strategic development. The process has been going from the very first sense-making session in the start of this year with 10 of our grant holders for a couple of hours online to the most recent one, which brought together 80 people in a room for a day, but also involving policymakers and practitioners to try and integrate some of that other types of decision-making power into our thinking and grappling with common challenges, most recently on educational attainment, for example. We found as we developed this framework that by integrating our impact evidence as far as possible in the words of our grant holders, combined with other types of insight, which might be government data, it might be lived experience insights, we're able to drive more strategic conversations where we stand on common ground. Final points would be, we know that people don't live their lives in the thematic silos we've created. So we are keen to look across our themes at the next stage. But the fundamental point from a governance perspective would be, we've now established a regular learning cycle. It's removed a lot of the anxiety from staff and board members around what's coming next, because we can look a year ahead. And in tandem, we've just finalised our new 3-year delivery plan. And although much of our thinking was being reset, we had effectively landed on an impact framework, which we're confident in. It is improving and changing, but that's one variable that was not up for grabs as we created this new delivery plan. So things have fallen into place, not necessarily in the optimal order. I'm happy to talk some more about the messiness of it, but we've landed in a place where, with curiosity and humility, we're able to codify our learning, share it openly, take feedback, and improve that cycle as we go into the next stage. It's been a pleasure to be part of this process and be a case study, and thank you to all of you for listening today.
Thanks so much, Jim. And yeah, please do get ready with any questions that you have. So now I'd love to introduce Rose, who's going to talk to us about Sitra.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone, also from Helsinki. And I also wanted to thank the community of practice with Esade for sharing this strategy process journey with us. It's been absolutely brilliant, and we've gotten a lot of food for thought for our strategy process, which ended a bit over a year ago. And also it's enabled this wonderful documentation of our strategy process, which I don't think we would have possibly not done without the community of practice. But anyways, so the case study is very much about this transition and strategy redesign, which at least in my career is one of the most radical shifts that I've been involved in. And like Jim was talking about, this more sort of thematic long-term strategy. This is what we had before. And there's this action for the future strategy is very different. And on the screen, you'll see our mission, which hasn't changed so much, but I think that the mission has remained the same, but the vision hasn't changed so much. But we are really like moving into this capabilities based strategy, which is quite a new like novel concept, I think, in the strategy terms. But from the previous strategy, what's new is really like reducing the number of impact goals, and they are tied to the kind of capabilities that we want to strengthen with our strategy. So we have 2 impact goals in the new strategy. One which is very much related to strengthening futures thinking in the society at large and enhancing foresight capabilities in decision making, and the second one which is to produce significant societal innovations and strengthen Finland's innovation capabilities. But I would add one point, which is that in the strategy process, we also enhanced and increased or made the strategic decision to increase our international programming, which is also based on the kind of value proposition that this is what we would be taking into the international sort of programming more. But the reason why we had this fairly radical strategy change was really driven by the external sort of circumstances and external inputs. at Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine and in Finland. We felt that, of course, very, very strongly. And we've had almost 20 years of stagnating economic growth in Finland. We have zero growth for 17 years. We have very high unemployment, which doesn't necessarily sound so familiar for many of you, but this is a fairly dire situation in Finland. And we had a new CEO, and we discussed a lot in the community of practice that usually that comes with a lot of changes. So that's in short the kind of the strategy process, and I think that the case study is we can perhaps switch to the next slide. I only have 2 slides. The case study is very much related to this kind of the shift in what we probably had more the strategy as a plan before, and I bumped into this graph, which is great because it very well manifests like what we're talking about here on LinkedIn, and it's really about the 2 forces of strategy: this stabilizing strategy, and then transformative or transforming strategy. And a lot of the case study describes the kind of like the shift from this, though we of course think that the kind of the optimal the situation is taking the best of the both worlds and balancing between these 2, and I think that there's also actually before I go into that more, there's our operating model, which maybe warrants like a few words, because we did not only change like our impact goals and what we do and how we do it, we also changed our entire operating model from the kind of thematic system to a very sort of, well, a basic innovation funnel model where we use foresight and insight to kind of scope, scope societal challenges, and then we take them to our like solutions hub for experimentation, and then scale with partners those that are viable for taking further. But so that also takes us to a very different type of impact measurement and management system. But to go back on the 2 forces of strategy, I think what we've also, and it's a little bit like present in the case study as well, if you take these 2 forces of strategy to 2 extremes, I guess you could say that in the stabilizing one, you have a very static strategy, and in the transformative one, you have a very chaotic situation. And that's what you need to balance. So the way that we've kind of built our IMM system now, but we're only 1 year into the new strategy, it's really like trying to kind of stabilize the vision and the impact, and then, you know, have the transformative part on how we achieve them. And so in the IMM, the terminology, that means that we have kind of taken a different way of measuring results and key results and formulating our objectives on a shorter time frame. And then the other issue which is related to this is trying to make it more adaptive. And I guess with the adaptive, we mean that we've even more systematically tried to integrate sort of insight and foresight and trends into our like planning, monitoring, evaluation, and learning loops. So that's what we mean when we say that it's a more adaptive IMM system. So I think there's a lot of information in the case studies, though. If this is a short introduction to our like the journey on the strategy shift, then the last slide is just providing like a link with a lot of the tools that we've used in our strategy process, but also what we use in our implementation and execution of our strategy with the within the framework of the impact measurement and management. So I think that's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rose. Yeah, as you said, that's a summary, and there's obviously a lot more content in the case studies, but I really liked your stabilizing and transforming strategy graphic there. So now it would be lovely to introduce Harry from Argidius, who's going to be our last case study speaker, just to share a bit about Argidius's journey. Thank you.
Hi everyone, and pleasure to join you today. I'm going to try and be quick because time's marching on. So I'm just going to provide an overview of what our strategy looks like, why learning is such a powerful part of our strategy, and how we've brought the two together. So very briefly, Argidius is part of Porticus, which advises the Brennickmeier family. And Argidius has always been about enterprise solutions to poverty. Over the last 10 years, we've focused on small and medium enterprises and building the ecosystems that are both effective, high quality, and high reach that enable those SMEs to create the poverty busting growth and jobs that they do in emerging markets. And the strategy has three main components. So ecosystems in particular countries, building the capacity of the most effective organizations and institution building those to operate at scale, whether that's deeper in their regions or indeed globally, and promoting shared learning, not just so that we can understand what works, but so that the whole sector, and doing this with the whole sector, so that the whole sector can learn together how do we use our resources most effectively. Next slide, please. So here there's a couple of layers to this. The first one is the lever. So this, if you look at on the left-hand side, that represents the Argidius funding that has gone into the last 10 years. On the right-hand side, that's the level of impact in relation to the resources that we've put in. So the orange coins are the direct impact that we've had through our partners that work directly with enterprises. So there's about 100 of those, and they've generated over 9 billion euros of additional revenue and investment in their economies, and they've generated over 1.68 million new jobs. Now, we're very proud of that impact, and that impact's grown significantly, and because the effectiveness at which it's grown has accelerated. That's a result of being able to test a variety of interventions, identify what works, and integrate that into our forward-looking work that has meant that any grant that we do now is generally at least 10 to 20 times more effective than 10 years ago, and we hit more home runs which are even more effective than that. And we're very proud of that, but the green coins are the additional impact that we're having as a result of our learning. And our learning represents just about 1/8 of our overall grant making. It's not possible without our direct testing in the field, but from an impact perspective, it's generating vastly more impact. And that's and that piece is growing. And if you look at the map, the slightly grayed out map, those pins represent both national governments and key international development funders, which have all significantly improved the effectiveness at which they fund interventions in our space. And they are multiplying their impact as a result of that knowledge that we've helped to generate and curate and bring into the appropriate tables and places and spaces. Next slide, please. So how have we brought the two together? Well, obviously you can see that learning was an absolutely central core part. It was a core pillar in our strategy, but it was also played out throughout our strategy. So we started with a key learning question, which our strategy was built from. How are SMEs, how are these enterprises best supported to grow and create these poverty-busting jobs? And that question was set at a level that's not just relevant for ourselves, but also for the sector. Everything that we funded looks at an aspect of that question and can be tied back to that question and contributes to that question and does so on an ongoing basis. So that cohesiveness is really important. The freedom to test a range of approaches, because there's all sorts of interesting things that people do with SMEs. When we started, no one knew whether any of it worked or not. And so that was a really important place to start. And what we've seen over time is it doesn't matter what topic within SMEs broadly, which do cover often sort of 60 to 90% of emerging economy employees, whichever part we choose, it's impossible to see what's going to be the most effective from the outset. And we see a huge variety in the performance within our portfolio. So testing is really, really important. Everything that we've funded, we've paid those organizations to build their own monitoring evaluation systems, one, so that we can collectively learn what is and isn't working, and two, so that they can carry that forward as a stronger and more effective organization and put others' resources to better uses going forward. And what we see is these patterns. When we look at the most effective interventions and projects versus the least effective, and when we also pay attention to what others are learning, we start to recognize patterns of what determines success. And we codify those up in very collaborative ways with the targeted audience and with key practitioners, such that these are user-centered and folks can easily pick up these key knowledge pieces. And then we do a lot of sharing, because one of the frustrations that we had is that evidence doesn't necessarily translate into policy and practice. In fact, it basically never does that by itself. And so there's a lot of work in relation to the influencing and the advocacy to help do that. And it was great to hear Jim talk about that earlier. And all the while focusing on building organizations and institutions that can carry on this learning and effectiveness into future relationships, regardless of whether or not we're involved. So there you can see a sort of another view on our approach and our model. And the testing, we've sort of sized these according to the impact, because the influencing piece is where the least money goes, but it's the most impactful, but it needs those other cogs to turn before it can be turned. So we spend a lot of time on the testing to work out what works. As that emerges, we scale up the most effective, we codify the lessons, and then we focus on the influencing agenda. And so I'm going to pause there and hand back to you, Joanne.
Thanks so much, Harry. Okay, wonderful. Well, I think we have got three quite different case studies, very different contexts and thematics. Really encourage everyone to start posting questions. We'll just get going with one or two questions now, but we'd love to hear from the audience. So I suppose one thing that we talked about in the research was this frustration of our community of practice, that there isn't better strategy and IMM alignment. In the past, this hasn't been so evident. So I suppose, Rose, I'm going to ask you, since just shuffling the order a bit, but why do you think that's the case, and how can we sort of change that? So as a kind of field of actors engaged in social and environmental impact, how can we kind of work to improve this? What do you think needs to happen?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Well, the one thing I think is what's already, I think, in the documents very well kind of described is the kind of senior management buy-in for the impact measurement and management system. So in a way, the closer you can be to the senior management or the management, then the better it is in terms of the alignment. But the other thing is having meaningful impact goals. At least I think in the past, and that's also partially probably like the reason why we've a little bit changed our IMM sort of structure, is that when you do have a fixed a strategy, and it usually comes with a 5 years results framework or like a log frame, you are often, because of donor funding or other reasons, you're quite fixed on the impact goals that you've set at the beginning of that strategic period. And then a lot of things happen, and like my years in evaluation function, like I spent a lot of time like trying to look at the reasons why you did not achieve those impact goals, or there was even like negative net impact on some of them because the context changed, the trends happened, and a lot of unexpected things happened, and then so in that sense, then you go retroactively back and you try to look for what happens. And yes, it's important to learn from the past, but then those lessons, why you didn't achieve those goals, they might not be valid when you go further, because then there will be other changes and other trends and other scenarios and other big unexpected events that will turn the thing around. So I guess in short, the outcome, even if the outcome goals are at like a 3-year span, they need to be meaningful and they need to be revisited, and you need to have like a system where you don't need an external evaluation to come and tell you that you didn't achieve these, but you need to have an internal mechanism with IMM and learning loops that will address if it's unachievable or if it's irrelevant. So that I think is very important, and that's the adaptiveness of the IMM system. And while you have the long-term vision, I think that's what stabilizes. In the short term, if you have to change your strategy or something, that should be just the metrics for success. So I think we should more and more measure like how adaptive we've been to the external situation, rather than looking at the log frames and the results matrix. But I think it's already going to that direction to many of us, anyways. So.
Great, Jim. Any reflections on and maybe as a non kind of evaluator yourself, someone who's come in and absorbed it all and seen it, and maybe from that CEO perspective, what do you, are we speaking too much jargon? Is it too hard to cut through?
So there's definitely been a risk of speaking too much jargon for our trustees, who all come from very different walks of life. Some have expertise in this and some have very little, and the challenge is to be able to translate this so that you're offering appropriate assurance about impact, but really going on a journey around uncertainty, adaptiveness, as Rose is saying, and being and not seeing that as a problem, but seeing that as a strength of a system, and seeing rigor in that adaptability. If I think back to where we started 5 years ago, we had, before I joined the organisation, before my colleagues did too, we had pockets of evaluation and learning in particular programmes, and they were coherent in their own right, but we could not tell a story in terms of the total impact we were trying to contribute to. And then our first version of this framework was also trying to take learning from across very different themes and tell a high-level story that was too broad and too vague and lacked depth. And although that was informative as the first cut, it did not help us to drive conversations with board members or underpin decision-making about resource allocation with any confidence. So we're now on to version 3.0, really in 2 years of this framework, and it is the continuous improvement. What has helped us has been clarity about a long-term strategy, and being able to update our mission as we go without putting at risk the learning culture we've tried to build.
Thanks, Jim. Maybe a final word from Harry before we take questions. Anything you want to add?
When we started there, building on Rose's point, there was very much a culture in the evaluation industry of accountability. And some of that was driven by the, public funders are big in this space and they want to make sure that taxpayer money is being spent on what it was meant to be spent on. But that doesn't necessarily help you actually achieve the change that you're looking to achieve. So, that's been a journey. It's good to see, more focus on learning. And I think it's, about making the case that learning's not a sort of sidecar. It is an absolutely, if you want a system to change, it needs to be able to do things differently than it's doing now. And learning is a critical component to identifying, to both asking the questions of what does the system need to know to do things better, and how do we generate and generate that knowledge and embed that knowledge in the actors that it needs to be embedded in. So I think there's there's opportunities. There's also challenges in terms of it can easily get lost and left as an afterthought.
Thanks. I'll hand over to you now, Lisa.
Okay, thank you. So there are a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I think the first one actually, I think Harry answered quite well in the presentation, because it talks about how do you benchmark between different programs and how do you compare. How do you understand if a program is doing better than another? And I think you explained quite well, how you actually created a system and collected a lot of data, and that actually allowed you then to have this type of comparison. But perhaps you could say something more about that.
Yes, and it's a good question, and it was part of why we selected certain focus ecosystems in which to work, was because we're a small team and we wanted to be able to identify what does work. So we needed similar contexts to test both similar and adjacent interventions in those contexts. So that was an important part, because it's very easy to say that won't work here, but when we've tested it in a variety of different markets, and you're benchmarking against what others are seeing, and you're supporting research that's creating benchmarks, you can start to cut through that, because it often there are similarities in what works across different places. So I think that piece is important, and then creating as simple as you can that kind of measurement framework. So what are the best proxies for the change that you're looking to see, and measure those consistently over time with follow-up. So for example, we don't just fund grantees during the implementation period, but there's some support for them to follow up with those that they work with for 2 years afterwards. And we do some trials that go well beyond that as well. So that follow-up is really important as well, because when we're talking about impact, it's not an overnight thing. It takes time to manifest, and you need to support the appropriate structures that can capture that.
Okay, and perhaps a connected question from Nicole Etchart is if you could provide an example of a practice that was codified and shared.
Sure. So the first one that we did was scale. So this is in relation to how our entrepreneurs best help to grow their businesses through non-financial means. So in terms of different advice and acceleration and so on. Scale is an acronym of key pieces that are important. So just to pick one of these, charging really matters. Most people in our industry either assumed entrepreneurs shouldn't pay anything at all because they're poor and from poor places. And some people thought they should pay the whole cost. Well, we found the truth lies between the two, but importantly, when entrepreneurs pay something, it transforms the relationship from being a receiver and just, waiting for something valuable to come along and to actually being demanding of value, where I'm paying for a service. It doesn't matter if you're paying the full cost or just a small piece, but I'm paying and I want some quality. So you got much better feedback and much better relationships. And it acted as a filter where the kind of, it's bad to say, freeloaders, but you're actually working with people who are ready to invest in their own growth and development, even if they're paying $10 to participate. And we've got a brand new one on banking coming out next month.
Okay, thank you. There's also a question from Heather, and this is for Robertson Trust, so for Jim, about the insights reports. I think you can read the question, Jim, because it's quite a long one. But could you explain a little bit more about your work to actually share the insights and creating engagement as well?
Thank you. Yeah, so we are on the point of publishing our third in the quarterly cycle of thematic insight reports. What's been really important is that those reports fully reflect the collective sense making, and they aren't just a kind of collection of case studies, but it's the the lines between, if you like, and the connections between, but also drawing out what's distinctive about those case studies. Of course, negotiating permission, because not everyone wants to be held up as a case study, no matter how good their practice. So we openly publish. We can certainly do more to promote and drive awareness. But one new thing we did with our most recent report on work was to go to the Scottish Government, our devolved government, and to speak to policymakers. And I think because we're coming with rich learning from across the country, and we're not going asking for money, and we're not going with a single ask for the budget, we're going with our map of learning, and we're saying to government, we think there are lots of improvements that could be made to practice, so that it shouldn't matter that, you know, where you live, whether you have access to a quality service. In a sense, our grant holders are demonstrating what's possible. Our funding is only ever a small part of that contribution. And so I think it is at the next level, going up a gear for us would be mobilizing around the advocacy, but it's on behalf of good quality evidence. It's not centering us as an organization.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And actually, maybe I could sort of connect this question as well to Sitra, because I know that Rose, that you went through, you know, a very thorough process of engaging with different stakeholder groups to develop your strategy. And if you could say something about that as well, and how you even, you know, engaged quite a lot with Finnish citizens, you know, to understand what was important for them.
Yeah, I think for the strategy process, we had a fairly large stakeholder questionnaire, which had over 1,000 responses, and then we had some other participatory rounds as well. But really, and we also used data from our previous sort of evaluations, where we had already done some horizon scanning on like what are the kind of emerging sort of needs, critical needs. So we had a lot of data for doing the kind of, when we were refocusing, because what I didn't talk about earlier is that we are still operating with specific strategic sort of areas which we have chosen. But it's prioritizing really when you have a lot of participation in a strategy process. In the end, at some point you have to make some of the decisions, and actually the volumes actually make it very difficult. But the more you have participation, the more you will have views, and the more, you know, it becomes harder to kind of then make those prioritization processes. But yeah, we've used a lot of the foresight tools in kind of collecting views, and for other purposes in Finland, we also use these larger platforms like Polis for sounding views and things like that. But for our strategy process, we had a very classic stakeholder survey, which was sent out to our stakeholders.
Great, thank you. So Leonora, do you have any final words about?
No, I think it would be firstly, yeah, we just want to say from a logistics perspective that we will send out an email with the recording. I think that will probably come out tomorrow. So anyone who's missed it or wants to share it, please feel free. Thank you so much for coming. It'd be great to have maybe the panelists, and Lisa, if you want to just a final sentence or two on this topic, and maybe thinking about what you might advise organizations who are, you know, looking to improve the alignment between their strategic decision making and all of their impact and evaluation work. So I think we'll end on that note, but thank you for coming, everyone. Yeah, so I don't know who wants to go first, but feel free to jump in.
In 10 seconds, Leonora.
10 seconds, yeah.
I think it's work out what's so distinctive about your model that has to be reflected in your framework, but then don't try and do it alone. Speak to your peers, learn from everybody else's do's and don'ts, because although your mission is distinctive, a lot of this practice, as you're showing, is in common.
Thank you. Harry or Rose?
I'm going to build on Jim's point, because yes, do it with others, and back to one of Jim's earlier points around, you know, speaking funder to funder is extremely powerful. So we found governments often will listen, especially if we come as a group of funders representing the evidence. And so that's why foundations are in such a privileged position to fund and test a variety of things. It's so important we use that position to really generate the learning and then use that to influence the much bigger wallets that are out there.
Great. Final word, Rose.
Yeah. Well, I'll say one thing. I think what I think is important is to balance with those long-term and short-term priorities and objectives, because with the balance with those two, you can both have like a strong vision and you can also remain relevant in the fast like changing time. And the other thing is like to think about the fact that what we are living through now is not as linear as we are kind of we are programmed to think, and the kind of complexity and uncertainty really needs to be taken into consideration in the IMM systems or the PMEL systems. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, my final words would just be to thank all of you for being part of the research, you know, because we have learned a lot, you know, through the case studies. And I think as well, I would like to thank the community of practice, as Rose was mentioning, that I think it's been very important as sort of a sparring partner, no, going through the process and learning from each other. And I think this has been a wonderful process, and of course Leonora for driving the whole research project, as well with Chiara, you know, our colleague. So thank you so much for joining today, all the participants, and we will have the recording and the publications available for everyone to read through and learn, and also for the funders of the community of practice. So thank you all very much.